I want to show a method where you can store multiple variables in one step rather than have one step called, say, department name and one called manager name. Instead, you have it all in one step, which has multiple key value pairs. And I got that idea from Gorilla BI's page on the list accumulate function, where here he's using a record to store two values, a minimum value and a maximum value. And then you can refer to the minimum value by calling that step and then the minimum column within. And that's exactly what I'm going to do to show it. And what I have to do here is to just make a new step where I will use square brackets because it's one row with multiple values and then the values are called columns, but it works the same way as a Python dictionary. So I can call my column minimum and use the list.minimum function. And here I have to refer to the previous step, the change type step, because that's my table. But I'm using a list function, so I have to call specifically the column, which is then called column. And then that returns a record, which has a key and a value, or a column and a value. And I can then add another row, well, not another row, another column, and call that maximum, and then use a max function. And here it's important not to copy this comma, because then you'll run into issues. And now I have both the minimum and the maximum from my change type step, and I can then refer to it by calling the custom one step and specifically the minimum column. So if I just add another step here where I just call the change type step, just for illustration, and then I could add a filter, and then I want to say that I only want the maximum or the maximum -5, which means instead of 6 here, I will call the step, and actually I should call that something like my values. So instead of 6, I can say I want to grab the value from my values, and specifically the one called maximum, and then I want to say -5 from that, which means that I'm looking at the value 70, and any value that is greater than or equal to 70 minus 5 should be included. And the other option you have to do here is that if I add another step here, and hopefully it doesn't change references. No, it doesn't. And then I can say I want this to be called my maximum, because this is the alternative method you can use. And this is the one I usually use, which is each step should only have one information, and that is, so when you call the my maximum, that is just that one value, which means you can now go in here and say, well, how did you get to this number? Maybe if it's something like my source step here, where I'm saying Excel current workbook, name, contents, and then you can break it down. That's easier to do when you have one value for one step. So I could copy this code, and then instead of calling my values and then grabbing the maximum value from that, I can instead just call the one called my maximum. And it's functionally exactly the same, so it would all depend on what you prefer. But I personally think it's nicer for my user to have one value per one step instead of having multiple values. So it all depends on what you think is cleaner and what you think is nicer for whoever has to take over your work. Yep.